Welcome to the Impact Files podcast. I'm your host, Ned Wells, and I'm really pleased you're here. Welcome to the Impact Files, and in this episode we are delighted to be joined by Jay Light, Director of PACT Dogs. Jay, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks for having me. Pleasure.
So Jay, let's start with a personal introduction to yourself, to PACT Dogs, and the work that you do.
Certainly. So I'm a director of PACT Dogs, which is a business within the animal welfare sector. It's an educational and membership organisation. And I have a number of different roles and things, both with impact in that sector, but also beyond. Actually a chartered environmentalist with the Institute of Sustainability and Environmental Professionals. They've renamed, people might know of them as IEMA.
Okay.
They've renamed this year, which as a sustainability professional, it's something I'm very behind. I was a member of IEMA for a number of years and actually a fellow member and sit on one of their national committees around the circular economy. So I've been involved in the environmental sector for several decades. I like to think it don't show that in my youth. Predominantly in the public sector, so I've worked for different local authorities on all sorts of environmental management things.
Okay.
And until the beginning of this year, worked in the NHS for a few years on sustainability. So have been doing all sorts of different bits and pieces around sustainable business and sustainable ethics in the public sector.
What was your route into PACT Dogs from the public sector?
So like a lot of people, where we kind of in the animal welfare sector, a lot of people, there's always a kind of they call it a heart dog. Quite often, there's an animal who kind of brought you into that sector a little bit. And myself and my wife adopted a dog probably around 14 years ago. He sadly passed away last year. And that kind of set us a bit on that journey. My wife studied zoology at university and worked for local wildlife trusts and done a few things around ecology. There's sort of been a bit of a twin track of me working in the kind of broader environmental sector, her working in ecology and biodiversity. And she moved more and more into the kind of dog side. And zoology covers a lot of the elements related to this. She's now a clinical animal behaviourist and was teaching on one of the PACT courses. And PACT stands for the Professional Association of Canine Trainers. She was teaching on one of the courses. The lady that ran the organisation, this is about 4.5 years ago, decided to retire and essentially sold the business to us. And there's another couple that we work with.
Right.
So we took on an organisation with a few dozen members. There was a single course that was running, and having quite a lot of awareness of the sector and some of the kind of challenges. Had a really good discussion, had sessions with business coach and all sorts about whether or not to do it, but also how to shape that, how to add our values into that. And decided to kind of inject some of our values into the kind of animal welfare sector, which picked up things around the environment, ecology, well-being, wider kind of business ethics and things. So,
how interesting. And was this about 4 years ago?
This was 4.5 years ago. So we've just sort of in tune with the fact it's called the Impact Files. Being called PACT, we publish every 6 months an impact report, which sets out a lot of our kind of positive things that we've kind of done as we've been going along. And a lot of those link to all of the different positive things we try and do around sustainable business and ethics and things,
which we're going to come on to. I wanted to just get a sense of the scale of the business as it is at the moment. I don't know if you could share kind of numbers of members, any notable clients that our listeners might have heard of.
B2B business. So we have our clients such are people who work within the animal welfare sector. So as I mentioned, originally we had a few dozen members and a similar number of students on the books when we took over the organisation. We're now up to well over 400 members, including students from across the UK predominantly, but we have quite a few members in Europe. And we've just had a member who has passed all of the assessments and is actually in America. So we have our first kind of USA member. So we're a growing kind of global influence. We've also kind of expanded our courses and things. We have a sort of educational course, which is a kind of level 4 for dog trainers, and then a behavioural course that is the next level up. Those trainers, because we're kind of business ethics extends in lots of different ways, but we wouldn't kind of just randomly run a course. There's issues within the animal welfare sector that it's maybe a little under-regulated.
Right.
So we sit under an umbrella organisation called the Animal Training and Behaviour Council, and they set the role standards. So our courses are designed to meet independently set roles for a dog trainer and for a behaviourist and things. So we had all of the course we had originally, we took to them, they've assessed it, they've signed off that course. So there's sort of extra kind of sort of strength to that, and it's got extra governance. And we then created the next course and things. So we've expanding very quickly within the Animal Behaviour and Training Council. When our members passed our assessments, they were able to go on their register. Over the last 4.5 years, we've been about 60% of the growth in dog trainers on their register. And there's another kind of 12 organisations there.
So you've got about 400 members, and are those charities and businesses in the sector?
They're from all over the place. So the ABTC their advisory members include all of the big kind of charities in the UK, like the RSPCA and Dog Strength and Blue Cross and Wood Green and things. And so we have a lot of members that are from those organisations that go through our courses.
Right.
We do all of our kind of main courses and webinars and events and things. We do a 25% discount for charity staff as well to support those sectors. But a lot of people will be just setting up a business. We have people that don't even have a dog who are just looking to move into the sector.
And so the courses you're offering are around what you might call train the
yes. I think it's a bit of a misnomer that people will think of a dog, say, oh, I'm a dog trainer, but 90% of the time they're actually a human trainer.
Yes.
So I think the technical specification is animal training instructor, because it's instructing someone else to train the animal within their care. So, but yeah, we have people from all different sectors, all different things. They obviously have hundreds of clients, a lot of those people. So our kind of sphere of influence where we work through those is sort of exponentially growing, where all of those people have hundreds of clients. Then we're very active in other ways within the sector. So we just attended an event in the House of Lords we were invited to around some animal welfare ideas and standards. Obviously through the ABTC, we're actively engaged in different things, and then we've done different campaigns and our annual conference in 2025. We had the only vet who's a member of Parliament attended and did a talk about his bill and things. So we've all sorts of different elements of kind of influence.
So you're training, you're offering accreditation, you're engaging at a kind of political level. You run a conference, which we'll speak about a bit later. And when we were talking off air a few weeks ago, you mentioned People Planet Picnic.
Yes, yeah. So I've been very active personally within the environmental sector, as I kind of alluded to, hosting, running a regional group for ISEP in the past and hosting different events. Our main course, we have all of the students come to a field, call it field work. We've got a venue, which I like to say is possibly the most sustainable dog training venue in the UK, maybe in the world. It's a sort of 3-acre former horse paddock, which has got thousands of trees and hedges that we planted and wildflowers, and we've got compost toilet, compost poo bin for the dogs. Probably talk for hours about the different things, and it's predominantly managed by my wife Natalie, who's a who's an ecologist in trade. But because I'm very active within the local sector, I do a lot of kind of peer-to-peer support. I've done membership upgrade sessions and all sorts with people. And a good friend of mine runs one of the local People Planet Pints run. And we had a chat about it. And I also within the local community, I was at an event and we were talking about it and agreed that we would host a People Planet picnic, which I think was maybe the first one to be held. And we had a few dozen people attend. We had a kind of vegan burger van that we sort of paid for them to attend, and people and bought lots of beer and soft drinks and things. And we had hours all the way in the darkness of the night with people, and it was hosted around May time about 18 months ago. So we are due to host one soon. So I think when this podcast comes out, we'll probably be a couple of months away from gearing up to there'll be a 5-year anniversary celebration for PACT. We'll have a big event. We've expanded our infrastructure at that venue as well, and we now have a local business has installed something that's akin to a Tesla Powerwall, and so we've got our solar and wind that we have on the site now. So we've got electricity. So it'll be even more into the night as we.
I will make sure that we're sharing in the show notes any information on that event. It sounds great. Yeah. Ruth, over to you.
Thanks, Ned. Thanks, Jason. It's so interesting. As a dog owner myself, just really interesting to hear, like you say, about training the trainers and all that kind of stuff. And as you mentioned, your sort of sphere of influence goes far beyond just the dog trainers, which is so interesting. Maybe you can talk a little bit about your kind of business case for sustainability. I mean, you touched on the fact that you've got a massive sustainability background. Your wife, I guess, is kind of linked to that in terms of the biodiversity kind of side of things. And for me, being a dog owner and meeting lots of other people with dogs, I feel that people who have dogs are kind of a bit more connected to the outside anyway, just because we're out there. And I mean, this morning I was getting completely drenched in the miserable rain. So I do feel that, they are kind of outsidey people anyway. So yeah, could you tell us a little bit about, PACT's particular business case for sustainability?
Yeah. At the beginning, all 4 of us that are the directors were really passionate about sustainability. So we were always going to kind of have as much sustainability as we could. Because there was existing members, we had a little kind of meeting where we invited everyone to introduce ourselves. And I sat in this very chair on the call thinking no one's going to be interested in the environmental side of things. And loads of the questions came through because we sort of said, here's our kind of values and ethics. And started with let's just run our organization with sustainable business in mind. And when we set up the limited company, we at the very beginning, because we had B Corp in mind, we put the processes and the wording in place within our models and things. It's the kind of early thing you have to do as a B Corp. But I was really pleasantly surprised how many people were like, actually, we want to hear from Jay. We want to hear what the kind of sustainability side is. So it very quickly moved from a kind of insular, let's look at what we're doing, into actually, let's look at how we can support the dog trainers. That's evolved a lot over the last few years. And the ABTC's role standards now actually includes a requirement that all of the animal training instructors and the subsequent roles need to have awareness and minimize their impact on the environment. So it's actually within the professional standards now. And that's, we're probably a part of that. There's lots of other brilliant people within the sector that have led to that. But that's how far it's kind of embedded in. And as you say, Ruth, you've got this brilliant sort of type of professional, which I've worked with hundreds of different professionals across different organizations, and I haven't met many kind of professionals who have that connect with the outside, which is a really good way of retaining that kind of passion and commitment around sustainability, but have other kind of skills and roles that help them kind of really drive that.
Just remind us, what's the ABTC? What does that stand for?
So that's the Animal Behaviour and Training Council.
Right. Okay.
So they have that within their standard, and that's, I think, really positive. And that's something so in our assessments now, we have questions around the environment. Whereas when we first took over, The training course, we actually embedded 2 kind of business lectures within it, which is quite important because there's certain aspects of business that you need to have some understanding of, like insurance and risk and things like that. But I had already turned those into kind of sustainable business. So we had discussions in there to kind of start to help people consider different elements around that. Sustainable business, that's kind of grown as we've moved along. I think the really interesting thing, I quite often talk about there's a hairdresser study where a university and a local authority worked together with some hairdressers, and they taught them about benefits and what benefits you can access and things. And because hairdressers have they have time with people, they have a good kind of connection cross section of society. There's some really good research about how they managed to kind of engage with people, and they actually assessed people's understanding of benefits before they went in for a haircut, and then they assessed them later and actually a few weeks later as well, and found that it was a really good way of getting knowledge and understanding and things forwards. What I think is really brilliant about that is that, you had a group of people who had access to that cross sector. They also had good kind of time with people. It's between dog trainers, because they have both of those things. Is they have that connection with the environment and the outdoors, and a really good passion for that. Also, they're training instructors. They are teachers of humans. So, I can't think of many roles where people have that connection with people, and you don't know who you're talking to. We have members who, they sort of tell stories about how they had a kind of student who turned out to be a client who was a top executive of a multinational company. One of our members was working on the fishing show with Bob Mortimer, and because there's a dog on that show, they've got these people that have this connection with very different people in front of them. I was on a puppy class with ITN news presenter. You don't know who's next to you. That's just there in a kind of an educational, humble environment, and so you have these people that have this passion for the environment, connection with cross sector, and are teachers. So we actually, within our course, when we talk about sustainability, we're actually talking about and include a little kind of list of things you can drop into a conversation around the environment. Oh, I'm using this poo bag. I use a compostable one because I can put it in this bin. Here's the impact on the on ecology, if nutrients, or did you know different pesticides that you might use for flea treatment could go into the water body. There's a million different things. We actually, where we have wildflowers and things, we have a few interpretation boards even. So when people are walking around with their dog, they can see here's an insect hotel that, this was for this reason kind of thing. It's incredible, really. And there's actually a growing number of things that dogs can be related to in the environmental sector. So our member in America is very active within a project that got quite a big coverage globally around green lanternfly and invasive species, and they taught dogs to sniff out invasive species so that they could be kind of accessed. So I think it's often seen as, here's dog walkers, they're trampling on a nature reserve, or they're having an impact on ground nesting birds and things. They can have, and people do have. But as we all know, the best kind of behaviour change is kind of meeting someone where they are and finding a positive way to kind of bring them in and things. And that's certainly how we focus on that.
So, Jade, the question that is occurring to me as I listen to all these really interesting things you're doing is, have you impact report around this? Because it sounds like you're doing a huge amount, and in a very kind of distributed way. I mean, have you grasped the nettle and actually tried to sort of evaluate it in any way to sort of quantify it?
Not, I would say specifically on that side. I think a lot of it's similar to how we started with our sustainable business journey with PACT. We're slightly insular in what we kind of look at in our impact report. We've just done kind of 4.5-year report, which is kind of picked up on stuff, and it predominantly picks up on, it sets out our carbon footprint for the last 6 months. There's offsetting within that. It's how many webinars we've run, how many different things we've done, the amount of money we've donated to charities. We're well over £80,000 in direct donations, scholarships, benefit in kind for charities and things. So we've never really massively quantified that. We've actually just done a survey of all our members. We had around 100 members respond to that survey.
Okay.
And within that, it picked up on kind of priorities, the environment and things like that. But we haven't quite gone the next step to kind of go, well, actually, let's try and, if the average dog trainer did these things within their activities, how could you quantify that impact? And that,
the
could be quite interesting.
Be very interesting, but it could be very tricky to navigate the course between sort of greenwashing and greenwashing, in that there's clearly lots you're doing anecdotally, and you could kind of have a go at quantifying that, but it could be very tricky to be accurate about it. So maybe it's more of a kind of, it's just the story telling and the sort of sharing what you're doing rather than actually trying to put numbers to it in any way.
Yeah. And I think it's a difficult one as well, where your part of ethical business is around being really open and kind of sharing what you're doing and encouraging others to do it. And I think that's a difficult thing sometimes to quantify. I alluded to it with the role standards, having environment within it might have something to do with us. It might not. Quite a number of other organizations are now talking about the environment. There was a webinar recently hosted on dogs and ecology by another organization, how we kind of run things. So we very very passionate about animal welfare. So our the events and fieldwork and things are all kind of plant-based to kind of minimize any negative animal welfare impacts on how we run things. And other organizations you see kind of doing that now, and which is really good. And we can't necessarily take credit for that. Maybe a slight nudge that's kind of helped that. We might not be. We don't know. And it's but what we can do is look at that and think that's brilliant. The kind of that's celebrating other people's success is quite difficult sometimes with business, because you may be a bit envious if you're honest. But that's what comes out of being transparent and open and kind of showcasing positive things you're doing, which is really important. If you're just focused on yourself, it's quite a sad place to be sometimes, but that's quite hard to pull your mindset out. I guess it's something within environmental professionals, they call it kind of local to global, where you're looking at things that are happening around you and looking at how that fits in the wider context. And if you're able to step back a bit and go, actually, this is the kind of wider context and the impact that's having beyond, it lets you celebrate those, which is really important and quite healthy. It maybe gets rid of some of that kind of competition mindset and a bit more collaborative.
It's a perfect segue, because I think when you're talking about that, the sort of competition, the one thing that stands out for me is, my organisation is a new B Corp, and I know Ned and I were at a B Corp event not too long ago, and I think the sort of whole spirit of that community is, as you mentioned, transparency, but also like acknowledging that you're all on the same side. Like there's not actually, I don't feel that much competition when you're talking to a room full of other B Corps. So it's a really nice segue onto this next question, which is kind of about, I guess, your B Corp journey. And one thing before we get actually right into it is maybe you could talk a little bit first about the sort of cross section between being a sustainable business and also being an ethical business, because obviously you come from a quite heavy, as you mentioned, sustainability environmental background, and being a B Corp encompasses all of those things in terms of social and environmental governance. And being an ethical business, I'm sure as well, with the new standards coming out, I personally noted there was quite a bit more in terms of the ethical side of things, in terms of paying workers in your supply chain. There was quite a big section about animal rights and welfare as well, which is really interesting. So we'd love to hear your thoughts before we go into the sort of nitty gritty on PACT B Corp journey, in terms of your thoughts on I guess how being a sustainable business is kind of inherently being, I guess, an ethical business in a true sense.
There's lots I can kind of talk about in that. I think what's interesting for us is ethics is almost the output. So our the training methods and things, that's not my kind of wheelhouse. We've got loads of experts and things for that. But, there's ethics within that. You're working with another sentient being. So there's always an ethical dilemma there as to kind of minimizing harm and not having any harm and things, which isn't shared across the animal welfare sector. There's plenty of organizations and people who don't share those ethics, and that can be quite challenging. And even talked about plant-based food and stuff. That's a no-brainer for us. Our first conference was actually hosted in partnership with Winchester University's Animal Welfare and Ethics Centre. So because that's part of that.
Quickly ask Jay, where do you stand in terms of, obviously, I guess, dog food and animal welfare? I guess, how do you feel about that?
So I think you can look at it. It's the same of any food. So there's a brilliant education person who I know called Tony Corrin. He does a brilliant talk called The Burger Apocalypse. If anyone's ever seen it, Google it. It's a TED conference that I was actually involved in hosting. I paid for the venue and things. And he talks about, it's kind of meat-free Monday thing of you can kind of minimize things and it will minimize your harmful impact. So whether that's kind of environmentally from a kind of carbon sense or from an animal welfare sense. Personally, I haven't eaten meat for well over 20 years and there's lots of different reasons for that. But obviously it's a personal choice and things. There's actually, certainly for dogs, there's loads of research and I should declare at my centre I mentioned, one of their former professors is world leading in this kind of sector around dogs and food and different animals and things. And my wife was actually involved in one of his research projects on this. But there's the most important thing with diet is that it's been shaped and created by a dietitian. So it's actually nutritional. And this is for every animal, whether it's human or dog. That's the most important thing. And you can get nutrition, whether it's from an animal product or from a plant product, certainly for dogs. And even there's research indicating cats, which is maybe a bit more challenging. So if you're buying a product that's nutritional, in a way, it doesn't, from a kind of ethics position for the animal itself, it doesn't matter if it's plant-based or not. And then you can then start to think, well, is it this or this? And, we've got kind of 5 dogs in our house. They have a kind of mixture of different things. Most of their kibble is a plant-based kibble, but they might have the different dogs have got different preferences on different things. But that means, if we mix a bag of plant-based and a bag of not plant-based, then it's 50% less animal product within the thing, which is, so from an environmental sense, it's got that and it's reduced that animal welfare impact on that product. So I think it's easy to take things very extreme, or maybe extreme's not the right word, but there are
Not
really
black and white.
Yeah, it's really hard. 90%. I would say with sustainability, it's about being within society is the most important thing. I think I described myself in my Institute's magazine years ago. They did that kind of 3 words to describe yourself, and I think I said something like secret, a hippie in a suit or something. I kind of it's that kind of Superman analogy that he's the only superhero who kind of dresses up to be normal because he needs to be within society. And I think if you're too extreme either way, you drift yourself out of that and you can't engage with people because you need to be on their position. But yeah, there's certainly there are some brilliant products out there. You can have a very low carbon, very high animal welfare diet for dogs and they'd be very happy.
Thank you. That's super interesting. So I guess moving on a little bit to reining it back in slightly is obviously PACT is a B Corp. So could you tell us a little bit? I mean, you mentioned you took over the business and started to implement these sort of sustainability initiatives. Was it sort of a sustainable business before that, or was it all really driven by yourself? And I guess when you got there, how did you prioritize the things that you were doing? Because I've got in our notes here things like travel, purchases, your supply chain, uniforms, pay policies, your banking. So yeah, it sounds like you're doing a lot, and it'd be really interesting to know what you started with and why.
You could kind of describe it as a bit of a kind of cottage industry when we took over. I don't think it was a limited company. I think it was, a few people working for one person kind of thing. When we started, there's obvious kind of quick things. So, we had to set up a bank account. So we went
Yeah.
with a pretty sustainable option. Not a B Corp, but fairly good sustainable practices. And it was because it was Starling account. So it was, I think, the first bank set up by a woman, and that was quite important. So wider kind of ethics around social value and things. So there's obvious structural things where you can make very quick decisions when you're starting about, where to bank, where we might pick up different things. I was obviously, being environmentalist, worked in the sector a long time, I was aware of lots of kind of easy options. So like this t-shirt's from T-Mill, so it's the kind of circular economy. Normally the one I normally wear is made of former products that have been sent back to them and then reproduced. So we had those from the very start as a kind of option. So, not buying loads of stock and having it and selling it. We can just in time kind of approach for uniforms and things for members and stuff. So there was a few kind of obvious things. As we started to kind of sort of grow and discuss things with our members, there were certain elements which linked to sustainable business, which were kind of cropping up, like people not being paid properly for things. It's far too much kind of vocational approach, or, you can almost modern slavery, you could describe some people kind of treated within the sector. So very early on, we realized we needed to kind of have policies and approaches around that. Marketing was a huge one. It's picked up with kind of professional standards, but the sector can be somewhat unpleasant on social media. And some of that's come out of, people having ethical discussions around kind of tools and approaches with dogs. But we very early on realized that we needed to be very kind of sort of not so much strict, but have a really kind of positive approach with how we communicate and engage with other businesses within the sector and beyond. We actually wrote to every business we could find within the sector in our first week to kind of introduce ourselves and try and start with a positive footing. We tend to go to Crufts every year, and we actually looked up every single business at Crufts and emailed them all before we went on our first year to kind of see if we could engage with them and start that process. And actually our first Crufts, when we were a B Corp, I went around and actually met all of the managers from all the different B Corps that were at Crufts, which was nice. But there's kind of those kind of structural things. I think what was interesting was being someone who's done all sorts of different things, ISO 14001, all sort of technical things in the environmental sector. The B Corp process I found quite challenging. So when I first picked up the kind of BIA assessment, went through, there was areas that I wouldn't normally consider. Ownership. We targeted much everything. We were trying to see if we could, be as sustainable as we possibly could, which meant our kind of assessment through B Corp was really quite challenging because I think we ended up with just under 120 points on that assessment. But it meant the kind of we firmed up our approaches around donating to charity and assessing how much money we spend and the ownership of different organizations, whether it was female-led or that was led by, people from minority groups, and some of those different elements which can be easily overlooked, I think, if you're just looking at how you kind of do things. So that was, a really good challenge. And I think someone who's within the sector and a pretty good understanding of sustainable business, it was really challenging and pushed me, which I really enjoyed. And even I kind of reached out and I spoke to a couple kind of B Corp kind of assessors and community leaders in my local group, almost a kind of peer support, just the odd chat, just to say, I'm getting on with it, we're getting it done. Not necessarily asking for advice, but kind of getting that kind of like, shoulder to cry on kind of thing. It was, it wasn't hard. It was just, it's just nice having someone to kind of say, yeah, we're kind of going through that. And as I say, we're very thorough. we ended up with what I understand the highest B Corp score for any business in the animal welfare sector in the world, which, and there's vets and all sorts of organisations that are B Corps, and pet food manufacturers and things like that. There's quite a few. So, we were really proud of that. And that was really great. And earlier this year was the first ever award for most sustainable business at Crufts. And there's hundreds of businesses at Crufts, and we were really proud to win that award.
Yeah, I just wanted to jump in. You mentioned moments ago some of the negative practices that you were seeing in your sector when you joined, and you sent out letters and communications to say that you were sort of, in a sense, starting afresh. Without naming names, but I'd be fascinated to sort of know what kind of things you're talking about in terms of those kind of negative practices.
I think I believe there's views around not paying people enough, expecting stuff for free. Our annual conference, we very, very purposely treat our speakers like, gods. We pay them, pay their travel, we put them up for the night or maybe 2 nights, depending. Take them out for dinner the night before. Always put posh hotel. That's great for us because that kind of builds our reputation.
Yeah,
but we're very public about that to say, people shouldn't be doing stuff for free. The amount of people that actually approach us and will send us an invoice for like 20 quid for hosting a webinar or something silly, and we will go, that's that isn't your time. Like, we value more than that, and we've gone back to people and said, no, that's just and that's important from a how to help the sector move forwards way. It's also, we are teaching our students how to run their own organisation and business. I think kind of showcase best practice there. So that's certainly one area where I think people maybe unintentionally are maybe taking a bit advantage of, and that's that's a business practice thing of trying to kind of challenge that a bit.
And I think what's interesting for me is that you clearly come from a sort of sustainability background rather than a kind of raw commercial financial background. And we've talked a lot about the really impressive sort of moves you're making to be more sustainable in your organization and in your sector. Just touching on the business side of things, I'd be fascinated to know, are you from a business point of view looking to sort of grow and become more profitable? And what's your kind of worldview from a kind of revenue financial growth point of view?
So we've grown around kind of 25% revenue increase every single year we've operated. Our kind of profit levels have been fairly flat on those sort of first 3 years, 3.5 years. Predominantly where we've grown in staff and impact as an organisation. So, when we started, it was kind of 4 very part-time people. We've now got several members of staff. There's 4 people who are pretty much full-time, plus probably another dozen people who work for us doing assessments, teaching. We've got a job advert that's would have closed by the time this comes out for someone to work for as an administrator. We've been investing quite a bit in improving our infrastructure. So as we're growing, I'm very aware of the kind of dangers of businesses expanding and not having the right infrastructure. I actually did a management degree before I kind of got into sustainability. So I have a background in that. But I always say to people, the most important thing for any individual or organization or partnership or anything is to have a view on the exit and what the end might look like. And I think people now talk about like back chaining. I always say it's a bit, I describe it a bit like it can be with dogs as an analogy of, the worst thing to do with another animal, whether it's a human or a dog, is for them to feel trapped and not have an exit that they feel they can access. And that's exactly the same with the business, which is in itself a bit of an organism. And always having a view on what that end looks like, even if you've got no intention of using it. And that a lot of that is how we're improving our infrastructure and having the courses or our assessment processes so that anyone can come in and pick them up, and making sure that we've got that set up in a way that it's got that resilience and is able to be kind of, someone goes off sick suddenly, that kind of number 7 bus thing. It's having that kind of built in, and that's really important to being sustainable in a kind of business sense, not the other senses.
When you say exit, is that something that you can share with us as to what that kind of business exit kind of looks like for you, even if you decide not to take it?
Yeah, I mean, it's, I guess for me personally, there's, we're a limited company with shareholdings and things. So there's several exits that I could personally take. You could take as a collective. That could be, there's a few different routes there potentially. We are a membership organisation. We've got hundreds of members. Potentially you could look at different structures even for a kind of exit point. So,
and I think that's really interesting. I think that's really interesting. I think what that's saying to me is that whilst you are coming at it from a very sort of sustainability minded perspective, you're also, from what I've understood, structuring the business in a way that makes it a sort of commercially viable organization that you could exit from at some stage if you wanted to.
Yeah. And I just think from a kind of mental well-being, it goes, we have a whole package of well-being. We have a psychologist who does monthly sessions for our members, and there's a whole program on that. But I just think for individuals, the worst decisions and the most stress comes from if you feel a bit kind of, there isn't a route, there isn't someone that can help me with this. I'm the only person that can do it, or I can't see the light at the end of the tunnel. And I think having that there, even if it's on a piece of paper in an envelope, you have no intention and no, is just a bit of a comfort blanket sometimes. That you
indeed,
actually, if everything goes wrong, there's these kind of routes for me, and it in a way, I think it makes you less likely to need them.
Indeed. And Jay, I'd like to move on briefly to the role of the broader role of communications and media and marketing in driving your influence within the sector, because you've mentioned lots of different stakeholders that you engage with, from students, your membership, government, and so forth. So what's your sort of overall view as to sort of the role of communications and marketing and media?
It's enormous, really, isn't it? I think there's called communications policy, which sets out our kind of tone of voice and approach around marketing and things. The different stakeholders obviously will have different kind of audiences and ways of doing it. And if we're engaging with kind of on the government side of things, we're attending events in Parliament and writing to the MP. We actually have a website which has kind of guidance for our members and interested people about different topics and how to engage with parliamentarians and things.
Do you?
And that's part of that kind of wider package. We're part of the Better Business Act group, and we've signed up to a few different other kind of organisations for that. On the kind of marketing side, a really good example, our annual conference. So we run a conference every year, which is a online conference afterwards. So we record things and people can access that. But during the event, it's fully in person, and that's really a lot of that's to do with how important it is for people to make those connections and things, and getting people in a room and breaking down some of those barriers. What was really interesting, we ran a conference 4 years ago. We called it Connecting Communities. We had speakers from different parts of the animal welfare sector. I don't think any of the speakers were part of our organisation. They were all kind of brilliant external people. There was a vet, there was behaviourists, there was different kind of people. I actually did a short talk about the environment and things, and I can share you a link to the recordings because they're on YouTube. You can watch those if anyone's interested. But we had lots of people approach us and say, "Are we allowed to come? We're not one of your members." We called it Connecting Communities. That every topic was about how to connect vets with dog trainers, how to connect. We had loads of people approach, "Oh, are we allowed to come because it's the conference of PACT?"
Yes.
So we actually had quite a big discussion and in the end came up with the brand DogX, and we use a different tone of voice, different fonts, different colors. It's all kind of black and white, kind of monochrome. Imagery is very different, everything, because we wanted it to feel slightly separate from PACT, purely to break that barrier down. And the kind of sometimes the thoughts you have to do on your kind of marketing and engagement to get past some of those barriers. And the conference we had this year, we about 230 people. It was fully sold out. We had, I think it was about 40% of the people in it were members, and the rest of the people were from different charities or businesses or individuals.
Yeah.
Which wasn't, for our first conference, it was around 70% members, and we've managed to kind of get those different people in, and that was very concerted effort of branding, using different media platforms. Our speakers are probably a big part of that, because we have people from all around the world that we've flown in. When this podcast comes out, we're heading towards Crufts, which is when we announce all of our speakers. But we have our lineup for 2026 is nailed down already. We've got someone who we're flying in from Canada who's coming to be the keynote this year. Next year, so 2027 in October, we've actually already got a few speakers up for that one, and we've got someone coming even further than Canada for that one. And we can do that virtually, but actually bring those people together, making those connections. We have people who come every year, and it's like their annual kind of social. It rolls from a one-day conference. It always rolls into a pub with a karaoke till 4 a.m. session. So it's and that's a growing group of people. We had the whole karaoke area this year in this pub. So it's using those different ways of engaging and creating proper connections and bonds.
So Jay, I wanted to wrap things up by asking you, first of all, where do you hope your sector will be in 10 years' time or so?
So I alluded a bit at the beginning about the slightly under-regulated, the animal welfare sector. And interesting, because I'd say, adjacent professional in that the environmental sector is overseen by DEFRA, just as the animal welfare is. So I can see a lot of parallels, and I'm very active with my institute on the environmental side. So I can kind of see that. A lot of people in the dog sector particularly will complain that anyone can call themselves a dog trainer or a behaviourist. It's spoken about quite a bit. But interesting, anyone can call themselves, and people do call themselves an environmentalist. Putting the right packet in the right bin or something is, you can call yourself an environmentalist. Is even weaker, more diluted definition of that than a dog trainer or a behaviourist. But they're dealing with sentient beings, and that's where the ethical problems come in, and the harm and things. The Animal Behaviour Training Council, who I've mentioned, are taking huge steps in this, and they've just had the initial certification from UCAS. In the next 12 months, they should hopefully get fully UCAS certified for certifying professionals. So the approaches we take as PACT follow their model. So we would essentially be following a UCAS model for our professional certification.
Sure.
And that is, big steps towards much stronger regulation. There is a lot of regulation in the animal welfare sector, despite what people often say about it being unregulated. Some of the roles might not be regulated, but you could say that about pretty much every sector. But in the next 10 years, there will be a huge kind of revolution in that, I think.
Fantastic.
That will support us moving, as an organisation, because I think we're on the right train, heading, and one of those carriages going along with that. But it will certainly help the other sentient beings on the other end of the leash on that as well.
So, one piece of advice for businesses pursuing sustainability and financial objectives.
I think the big bit of advice I would say is look at your values as an organisation and look at where you can start to get quick wins as well as big wins. I think people, if you write a list down, there's very long to write a little list down and kind of go, here's the big things we want to do. And then you kind of spend a few years getting chewed up in something and you don't see those achievements. But there's millions of people out there that can give you advice on really quick, easy wins, which can have a positive impact. A lot of them that don't cost you anything. We have the fees for our courses we put aside in a holding account, so that it's part of our financial resilience and with off-call and things like that. And we've invested that in the charity bank, which is a very ethical bank that support charities within the UK. We get a bit of interest from that. So it's not, it's a good financial decision, gives us the resilience of that government-backed guarantee, because otherwise we'd have too much in our account. So there's a risk minimization thing, but it hits our sustainability objectives. That was pretty much no work to do. Our accountant had to make some connections. We had to sign some paperwork, but it gave us a quick win, whilst we've still got our eye on the longer game and some of the bigger things. And I think peppering those in is really important.
What a lovely message to finish up on, Jay. Thank you so much. Finally, how can people find out more about you and about PACT Dogs?
So me personally, you can find my profile on the PACT website, but also I'm pretty active on LinkedIn. So
sure.
If you look me up, you can find me quite easily, probably on there with various different roles.
We'll stick those details into the show notes as well.
Yeah.
Jay, that was brilliant. Thank you so much.
It's my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for joining us today. If you've enjoyed this episode, please subscribe, like, and share it with your colleagues. For more about the podcast, about us, our marketing services, and our wider support for purpose-led organisations, please visit our website at theimpactfiles.co.uk.